And you can see all the strands that are broken there. It's not the greatest. Welcome to Toyota Time with Timmy the Toolman and Sean. Today we are going to show you how you can make a new battery cable using some 1/0 gauge welding wire, a crimp terminal connection, some bolt cutters to cut the wire, and a hydraulic crimper to crimp the ends for the cable. What I noticed on my 85 Toyota 4Runner is the negative battery terminal is looking pretty worn out. Some of the copper strands have broken where it connects up to the body, and it's kind of a ticking time bomb. I want to take care of it so it doesn't cause me issues somewhere out on the trail having some fun. We're going to get out to the truck and I'm going to show you the cable I'm going to replace. We'll get it off and then we'll create the new one with all these things you see here. Here's my battery. The positive connection is right here and the negative is right here, and this is the one I'm going to replace. This one looks to be an OEM negative battery terminal. This positive one looks like it's been replaced sometime in the past. The dead giveaway is this is a 13 millimeter, and from what I've seen on almost every Toyota, they're all 10 millimeter. I'm going to get a 10 millimeter wrench on this and disconnect it from the battery. Okay, that's disconnected. And I'm going to disconnect the positive terminal also. And I'm just going to get this over here and out of the way. This negative terminal is grounded to the body right in here on the inside of the passenger side fender. And I'll move the camera so you can see the bolt that affixes the cable to the fender. It's this sucker right here. I'm going to get my Milwaukee ratchet with a short extension and 10 millimeter socket and zip this off. And it's just a small 10 millimeter bolt. The last thing I have to do to get the cable free is I have to disconnect this negative cable. I'm going to use a deep 10 millimeter socket for that. Okay, that's off, and you can see the cable right here. So here's the terminal end that hooked up to the fender, and you can see all the strands that are broken there. It's not the greatest. So it was overdue to be replaced. I figured out the length by seeing how I wanted to run the wire. What I didn't want is a lot of tight bends, and I think that's what caused this one to end up fraying over time, because it was bent in such a way that it was breaking the copper strands. I'm going to cut the cable right here with my bolt cutters. All right, I have the section of cable I wanted. Now I have to crimp on the ends. I have a set of terminal ends that I bought from Amazon. I'll put a link in the video description. And it has a full array of different size connectors and some shrink tubing that you can put around it to make the connection a lot more weatherproof and just look nicer. I want to strip back the sheathing to where I could just get the copper wire into this connection. It looks like right about there. I'm going to take my utility blade and cut off the sheathing. This is some pretty thick sheathing. I'm going to work at this a little bit and get this section off. My biggest connector is not big enough to slide over the copper strands of the cable. So I have to go back and do a little shopping. When I get the new connectors, we'll come back. All right, Amazon delivered the connectors I needed in one day. Pretty sweet. I grabbed some different size dies out of this kit, and I first tried a number 35, and I just put it around the connector to see, is that going to crimp it pretty good? That looks okay, but I'm going to go up to the next size, which is a 50, and I'll see how well that fits. That fits pretty damn good, but let me see what the next size up will do. Number 70, and 70 is too big. It's not going to crimp it at all. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start off with the number 50 size and then see if I get a good crimp of the connector onto the cable. So with this tool, you just have to pull the pin out and then you slide the dies in. The first one is going to be pointing up, and then the next one you point downward. And then you just slide the bar back in place. I have the sheathing cut back to where I need it to in order for the strands to fully sink into this connector. Now I'm ready to crimp the connector onto the cable. I'm going to slide over my shrink tubing first. And then I'm going to carefully put the connector over the copper strands, making sure I capture all the strands. Now I'm going to slide the connector into the tool. You have to turn the dial to on all the way clockwise, and then you have to start pumping this thing to get it to capture the connector. And as you get closer, you just want to make sure you're grabbing it where you want to crimp it. Okay, I finally got it where I want it, and then now I'm going to start squeezing down with more force and crimp the connector around the cable. And that's all the way tight. That's as far as I can go, and I'll release the hydraulic crimper. I'm giving it a tug to make sure that I got a good crimp on it. I'm not so sure if that's the optimal tightness. I clearly can't pull it off, but I just don't know if I crimped it enough. I am going to step this down to the next size smaller, which is the 35. Okay, that's tight. And that's looking a lot better. With these crimpers, sometimes you'll get a little shark fin like that on the top. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to put it back into the crimping tool, and I'm going to squeeze that part down so it's not as sharp. And then if I still end up with a sharp edge, I might just take a file and file it down a little bit. So when I put the shrink tubing on there and shrink it over the top, it's not going to be able to cut it. So I'll get it back into the crimping tool, and I'm going to line up that shark fin area with one of the dies and hopefully be able to flatten it down. I'm just going to do a light crimp. I was able to take down that shark fin. It's still a little bit sharp, so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to take a fine file and I'm just going to file off the sharp edges here. I grabbed a smaller file so I can get in there easier, and I'm just taking off the sharp edges. Okay, that feels pretty good. And now I'm going to slide the shrink tubing over the end, and I'll use my heat gun to shrink it over the connector and over the cable. But before I get out my heat gun, I want to put the terminal end on this side. So again, I'll put my shrink tubing over first, and then I'll slide over the negative terminal. Capturing all the strands can be kind of a pain in the butt here, especially when you're like me and you don't have great eyes. Okay, it looks like I've got all the copper strands connected, and then now I'm going to get my crimper and I'm going to crimp this end onto the cable. I'm going to start with the bigger dies first and then step down to the smaller ones, just like I did on this one. Actually, I'm going to have to take this die out, put the connector in first and then slide it in. And this connector is pretty long. My plan is to crimp it in 2 spots. When you're doing this, you want to make sure that the copper strands are all the way into the connector. So I'm pushing with force with my left hand on the cable towards the connector while I'm starting to crimp it. Because if you don't pay attention to that, the copper wire could start migrating out, and then you're not going to crimp it where you want it to crimp it. Okay, that's all the way crimped. Let's see what it looks like so far. So you can see I crimped it really close to the connector. Now I'm going to step it back and I'm going to crimp it right here. Okay, I've got it lined up pretty good. Here we go. Okay, that's tight. So here's the second crimp I did. So now I'm going to step it down to the smaller size and crimp it even tighter. Okay, I've got the smaller dies in the tool, and I'm gonna crimp it again the same way. Okay, that's tight. Gonna go to the next crimp down. Okay, that one's lined up, and I'm gonna crimp this one down. Okay, that's tight. And then I'm gonna do one final one right at the end of the connector. Since it's so long, I'm gonna crimp down the very end. Okay, that's tight. And you can see again, it's got these sharp shark fins. I'm just gonna take my files and file off those sharp edges. All right, I've got my heat gun. I'm gonna get the shrink tubing over the connector and have it lap over the cable. That looks pretty good. And I'm gonna shrink this one now. And here's our completed cable. We have the side that connects to the negative terminal on the battery, and we have the side that's gonna connect up to the body. Now we just have to get our new cable installed on the vehicle. First, I'm gonna get this negative cable reconnected to the terminal. This negative cable actually runs to an accessory fuse box back here on the inside of the passenger fender. And now I'm gonna route this in the direction I had figured out earlier and get it connected to the body. So I have the cable wrapping around this little fuse box here and then going to the fender. Okay, that's nice and tight. I had to do a little trial and error with this negative cable running to the accessory fuse box and with the main battery terminal. So I rerouted it a little bit to where both cables will be able to shoot right here between the battery bracket and the fuse box. And that seems to be a good run. And then I reversed the bolt nut. Originally the bolt was coming in from this side and the nut on this side, but when I have it in this fashion, it's going to be a little bit tighter to get to the bolt with the battery acid cap in the way. So I just moved it over to the other side. And that looks pretty good. I'll get my positive terminal reconnected. The bonus of doing this job is now both connectors are 13 millimeter. That's tight. And that one's tight. Yeah, I was wrong. It's actually a fractional size. It's 1/2 inch. But 13 millimeter is close enough. It will take it off. But in a perfect world, I would use a 1/2 inch wrench on this negative terminal. So here's the final shot of what it looks like. It goes from the negative battery terminal, it wraps around the fuse box, and then it goes in between the fuse box and the body, and it connects right there on the inside of the passenger fender. All right, I'm gonna start it up and make sure I did a good job. All right, it's good. All right, we're all done with this job. As you saw, it's pretty straightforward to make yourself a new battery cable. One thing that I should mention is newer vehicles, the terminals are integrated with other wiring harnesses, and it might not be as straightforward as I just showed you to replace the negative terminal on my 85 4Runner. On an older truck like mine, it's going to be pretty straightforward, just like I showed you. But if you have a newer vehicle with a lot of other integrated cables going to the terminals, then it might be a situation where you'll have to cut the cable out of spot and connect up a new piece of cable with a new terminal if you find that one of your terminal cables is really frayed and causing you issues. And on the topic of issues, it's kind of ironic that today when the cable ends that I was waiting for from Amazon came in, I went to a local muffler shop and I got my muffler replaced because the internals were rattling around and it was kind of driving me crazy. When I got back home from the muffler shop, I went to move my truck and it was completely dead. Nothing. I was getting no power. And then I started racking my brain like what could have gone wrong, and then it went ding. I was just messing the other day with this bad negative terminal, and sure as shit, the copper strands got broken even worse when I was manipulating it to take it off and put it back on. This was a ticking time bomb, and I just avoided a total fiasco being somewhere out on the trail and not having power to my truck. I eventually probably would have figured it out there on the trail, but getting this handled in the comfort of my own home with access to all my tools is the better place to be repairing it other than out on the trail. When it comes to making a cable, there are other options, but I believe I showed you the best option. They have terminal ends that just have a clamping plate with a couple bolts, and it just clamps down on the copper strands. And I don't believe that's as good as what I showed you by using a hydraulic crimper to really get a tight squeeze on the copper strands. When you compress a connector with a hydraulic crimper, you're squeezing it with so much pressure, you're basically pushing all the strands together and making one solid wire. So from what I've read and what I've been told by other people, getting the connectors crimped with a hydraulic crimper with all that extra pressure is much better than the other style, which is just clamping it down with a couple bolts and a metal strap. In the video description, I'll put links to all the tools I used and links to the welding cable, the negative terminal end, and the other connectors I bought on Amazon to complete this job. With all that said, we thank you for watching Toyota Time with Timmy the Toolman and Sean. We will, of course, be back with more videos. If you haven't subscribed, hit that subscribe button and also click on that notification bell if you want to be notified when we put up new videos on our channel. Peace out, happy wrenching, sick mods, and sick custom battery cables. Bye-bye.